I would guarantee you most companies don't even know what they're looking for when they talk about diversity hiring. I just don't think they know what that means.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion are among the top things candidates consider when evaluating potential employers. But what exactly is diversity hiring? How do you implement it in a way that's authentic and sets everyone involved up for success? My guest today knows a lot about how to make that happen.
Your success is not how many you've hired, it's how many are able to have an equitable experience through your stages, and then how many stay.
Tara Turk-Haynes is an executive leader with over 18 years of experience in talent acquisition. Tara is the founder of Equity Activations and is a sought-after speaker and consultant trusted by companies like Culture Amp, Sound Edit, and has been on stages at TA Week, Wreckfest USA, and many more. This is part one of a two-part interview where Tara shares the reasoning behind some of the most successful diversity hiring strategies she's implemented.
You don't have to sell the person after you've made the offer if you're already giving them like a really comprehensive view within the organization from a different perspective outside of the team.
How she got started in DEI and why she believes it's so important.
So I feel like DEI was always important to me before I even knew like what it was. I never want anybody to go through this. This is ridiculous. Like, you should never feel less than yourself trying to feed yourself.
And how to measure the success of your diversity hiring efforts.
That is the clearest indicator of all. So like, that's just data. You can't even argue with that data. So given the nature of my background, like being a Black woman and applying for jobs when I wasn't even in talent yet, like, you know, I was a playwright. I needed a day job to feed myself. I don't believe in being a starving artist because nobody should be starving for anything. And so whenever I was applying for roles, it was always like this big to do with how I presented myself. Like I had dreadlocks at the time, or a nose ring, or I'm like just like visibly Black. And so encountering people in the talent space who weren't, or people who were trying to conform to this idea of professionalism that was always exclusive and excluded people always bothered me. And so it wasn't until I was the EA to our CEO at Ticketmaster and our chief people officer, who was Beverly Carmichael, Black woman. Like, Beverly was amazing. And I had never encountered someone with that high of a title in HR who was Black. Like, I just never did. It never even occurred to me, you know, like there would be someone in that space. And she basically was like, I think you'd be really good at talent acquisition, because she just like, I think you have just like a natural tact for understanding people in a way that it's really helpful. And so I started off as a coordinator in talent acquisition.
I think that's a powerful story. It goes to show how important it is to have representation in executive management. That's how Tara got started in talent. But I wanted to understand more about how she got started with DEI. Understanding that piece of her story really helps frame why her approach to diversity hiring has been so successful.
So I feel like DEI was always important to me before I even knew like what it was. And then the idea of experiencing frontline talent applying as a low level like admin person and what that looked like, I was like, I never want anybody to go through this. This is ridiculous. Like, you should never feel less than yourself trying to feed yourself. Like, that just doesn't even make any sense. So passionate about that. And that's just kind of the worlds collided, you know, when the role of both of them came up and I was able to apply for it and get it.
I've been chatting with a lot of people in my DMs about the struggles they are facing with being a recruiter. A lot of talent acquisition folks are struggling to get on the same page with leadership about how to make diversity hiring work. Stephanie on LinkedIn asked me, over the past 4 years, I've dedicated my roles to focusing on diversity goals. However, it seems like many companies are setting up recruiting teams for failure. How do we approach diversity hiring in a way that ensures success for everyone involved?
I think it goes back to your personal why as a recruiter, right? Like, what's your personal mission? Like, why are you recruiting? And then why is the company looking for any of these diversity metrics at all? Like, what are you doing with all of that? I feel like if there's no cohesive idea about what that's like, then yes, there's going to be failure because you're not on the same page. You don't know what you're doing with that data. Candidates can sense when you don't know when you're asking them those voluntary questions and you just don't do anything. It's the why, right? But the more I think about these things, the more I feel like it should just be embedded into the job that you do from a day-to-day perspective. And one example of that for me is like, okay, so a lot of people use the metric time to fill. You and I both know we hate that metric, but whatever. It's like standard for some people, right? Why is the diversity of your pipeline and the stages that they're going through not standard as well? Right. So like we are cherry picking what DEI means for some and then doing business as usual for others. And I think it all should be business as usual. So if you're just a recruiter, you're like, this is what I come with. I come with these kind of stats. Even if you didn't ask for what this pipeline looks like from a diversity perspective or a demographic perspective, each stage, I'm still going to give it to you so that you understand where you are. So I think it's a little bit also like, don't ask permission, just make it part of what you do. And like if they don't do anything with it, it's not because you didn't give it to them. So I think we need to normalize this kind of behavior a lot more as recruiters than just asking the company, what do they want from us from a demographic perspective? Because we're the subject matter experts. We are the ones who do this on a regular basis. We know what these candidates are saying, feeling, thinking, etc. Funnel that through and tell that story, whether people are asking for it or not. Because I would guarantee you most companies don't even know what they're looking for when they talk about diversity hiring. I just don't think they know what that means.
I love that Tara spoke about looking at demographic data at every stage of the funnel. That's one of the things that I learned from Tara while working with her that has directly impacted how I approach conversations about diversity hiring with hiring managers and leaders within an organization. So many companies focus on top of funnel DEI and on measuring recruiters on the outcome, and I think that's where the disconnect happens. Tara shared some realistic ways companies can measure the success of their diversity hiring efforts.
So I think if you start looking at where candidates from specific demographics are falling off in your stages, I think that is the clearest indicator of all. So like that's just data. You can't even argue with that data. So if you're talking about number of applicants, cool, fine. Number of applicants that get past the recruiter phone screen, interesting, right? And then we get to the hiring manager, still falling off. You have to be able to understand what that data is telling you in terms of story. Your success is not how many you've hired, it's how many are able to have an equitable experience through your stages, and then how many stay. So like we're jumping over, I think we're pinpointing one success metrics of like how many people we've hired from specific demographics versus how many people were able to get through that pipeline equitably. And then what does our retention look like, 1-2 years down the line?
Tara hit the nail on the head here. And if you've been following me for a while or have ever heard me speak about recruiting, you know that one of the hills I'm willing to die on is that retention is one of the only metrics talent acquisition folks should really care about. There's such a big focus on time to fill, and so many recruiters think that retention has nothing to do with them. They think it's more of a HR and hiring manager thing. But it's a shared metric that we should all care about, especially when you're talking about diversity hiring.
I hear a lot of people talking about like trying to calculate mishires, right? And I feel like you got to work backwards, right? Like what are your exit surveys saying? What are your onboarding surveys saying? Like a lot of that data comes into what the success of your diversity hire really looks like. And you have to define what diversity hiring means for you, because each company, it's going to be different. Like every company I've been at has had an excuse about why one process has to be the shortcut. We need this person yesterday. This is a critical hire. Normally we would do it this way, but we're not going to do it this way because XYZ. all of those are fighting against your efforts when you talk about your commitment to diversity and inclusion in terms of your talent acquisition process. If you're making an excuse here, you're always going to make an excuse, and your data is going to suffer because that's still data, right? You don't exclude that data from the rest of it.
We then transition the conversation to talking about practical ways to enhance your diversity hiring efforts. One of the approaches that Tara is known for is including ERG leaders in the interview process. We spoke about the reasoning behind that approach and why it works.
So for me, DEI is all about connecting the dots within the organization. I don't think it's just one department and this department and that. It literally is a holistic story. And you can't really, I see a lot of companies saying like, well, we need, diverse hiring panel. But if you only have, one Asian American woman and she works in accounting, but this is your creative director role and they don't ever work together, why do you have her on the panel? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just tokenism to me in my experience. So building a community of voices within the organization, which is what I think ERGs should be. They're there to amplify their experience in the world and tell their coworkers what that feels like, both in this organization, but also in the world, to better educate people.
This ties back to how Tara got started in talent acquisition. Candidates can smell tokenism from a mile away. When it comes to DEI, you want candidates to be able to relate to others with similar lived experiences within your organization.
Because we are literally not smart when it comes to everybody's experiences. We just live in a bubble of our own. We just experience life in the world that we kind of create. You got to let people in. And that's why I think it's important to do that at work. So I think ERGs are community-based organizations. I don't think HR should start them. That's a hot take for a lot of people, but I just feel like it works better when someone raises their hand and they say, I'm really passionate about my experience in the world and in this place, and I want to start an organization so that we could talk about it so people understand. And then that naturally then flows into how, if I hire somebody who's from that, group, don't you think they want to hear from the people in that group within the organization? What's your experience like? How can I contribute? You're doing a lot of employer branding. You're doing a lot of like onboarding initially, right? Because then those people have already found maybe like a crumb of a community that they might be able to attach themselves to later on. If they get hired, you get people excited. So I just feel like, also goes without saying, I feel like you should pay your ERG leaders if you can. So then that way they are performing an additional service within the organization that only strengthens the organization. So they're the ones who are excited about saying like, I'd love to be on this panel. We'd love to build our community more. I really want to talk to this candidate, let them know, what it's really like and how they can contribute. It just is a natural flow. So we're not like siloed within our, or like our own worlds that we live in, which is, part of the problem, I think, as a society, like break the walls down. So yeah, I just feel like it's really important. I just want, ERGs are communities who are just trying to amplify their voices. And if they can build them in a talent acquisition process, then please, by all means, do it.
Have you encountered any pushback on including ERGs within the hiring process?
Not necessarily. I feel like the hesitancy I've seen before comes from not completely understanding exactly what I just said because it's so brand new and it's not the norm. But I also feel like there's a couple things that we kind of have to have in order for this to happen. You got to have trust within that organization, right? So those people need to understand that you're asking them to do this because you trust them, right? And if there is an apprehension, that's a culture thing within the organization and not talent acquisition. So if they're a little hesitant, this is some like culture building that you have to do. And when I say culture, I'm talking about like how you show up within the organization, psychological safety. I'm talking about like how you feel like there's transparency. Do you feel like you're on the same page? Like all of these different things. And then from the hiring team's perspective, I really feel like we have to do a lot of work. You and I have talked about this a lot, educating hiring teams on how to actually hire, right? Because everybody thinks they're so good at it, but the good people are always learning how to do it better. And so the talent acquisition team is there to say, we are on the front lines of hiring, and here's how you do it better. So if I tell you that having an ERG lead is going to be great for your interview panel, trust and believe that I'm helping you have the best person for this role show up and have the opportunity for them to understand what it's like within this organization without you having to do that hiring manager extra call, competing offer. Like, this mitigates some of that actually in the front part of it, because you don't have to sell the person after you've made the offer if you're already giving them like a really comprehensive view within the organization from a different perspective outside of the team. I think that's so valuable.
With all that has happened this year socially, politically, and with the talent acquisition and DEI job markets, I wanted to take some time and chat with Tara about her thoughts on where we are headed. Stay tuned for next week's video, where Tara and I chat about the future of diversity hiring and what lies ahead in 2024 for DEI and talent practitioners.
In the US, politically, the election's going to be a lot. And I think people need to understand the impossible can happen, and the security that we feel with protections for people who have not always had the most accessible experience within the workplace are very fragile. And so it really depends on us voting. Like, it's all connected.
Part 2 of this conversation will drop next week. Click on subscribe and the bell beside it so that you're notified when it's released. Thanks to Tara for being on the show. Connect with her on LinkedIn and Twitter. The links to her profiles are in the description. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. You can find me on Twitter @RonaB or on LinkedIn, Rona Barnett Pierce.